Okay. Okay, we're here, starting again at 1 o'clock. We're here for our first review of Seattle Public Utility and Seattle Parks and Recreation proposal for a new reservoir. Reimagined. Is it a place to become new based upon the scope of the work, or is it just a reimagined?
It will be new.
It's considered new.
Yeah, replacements rather.
Replacement, thank you. Reservoir for in the bitter. Why don't we go ahead, we'll go ahead and start with, instead of reading this online script that we have, we will acknowledge that if someone from the public attends, or Wendy, I understand that both Jason Tuff and Kevin Bergsrud will be attending if they're not already here. So we may need to call out to them, but if there is a member of the public, we'll acknowledge them during, after the presentation, but I'm not seeing any yet. We haven't heard. Why don't we go ahead and start with introductions with people in the room, and then we'll have commissioners attending online introduce themselves. And we'll start with alphabetic order, and I always forget this, to call for this, but when you introduce yourself, could you remind people your role on the commission?
Sure.
I forget that.
Good afternoon. I'm Ryan, I'm the planning commissioner.
I'm only like Cody Iron, transportation planner, position commissioner.
And your last meeting.
Oh, it's not. Very sad. Signing off after day, and I don't have any video. I'm really sorry. My computer died, and I don't have the cord. I have a lot of challenges.
We're gonna relinquish all comments.
Yeah, just slow backing up.
Sorry, you're not gonna be able to come back.
Okay.
Elizabeth Connor, I'm the artist commissioner. Good afternoon.
I'm Erica Bush, I'm the urban design commissioner.
And I'm Molly Spatomic. I'm the Get Engaged commissioner and an urban designer.
And Benita Sidhu, landscape architect, commissioner, and chair. Also my last meeting. Thank you.
And I think online we start with Jim.
Yes, no E for me to follow. That's. I'm Jill Crary. I'm the at-large commissioner.
I'm Matt Alfs, architect commissioner.
And if the presenting team could introduce themselves, starting with people in the room.
Yeah, so I am Andy Karch. I'm with the Seattle Public Utility. I'm the city project manager for the Bitter Lake project.
My name is Lael Alderman. I'm with Consular Engineers, and I'm the consultant PM for the project.
I'm Aaron Luoma, landscape architect with HBB for the project.
And I think we've been joined by two people, two other staff, at least two staff online, city staff. Kevin, could you introduce yourself?
Great, thank you. Kevin Bergsrud with Seattle Parks and Recreation in the Planning and Capital Development Division, and been working closely with the SPU team.
Thanks, Kevin. And Kimberly?
Yeah, hi, my name is Kim Mahoney and I'm the project planner for this.
Thanks, Kim. And we've also been joined by
Valerie Keenest, I'm staff to the commission.
And Michael Jenkins, I'm director of the commission. And then finally, Wendy. Wendy, could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. Clearly that is not one of my strong suits. Wendy Bandeker, staff, design commission.
Thanks, Wendy. And then Mary Weber.
Hi, I'm Mary Weber. I am an SPU drainage engineer in PW.
Thanks, Mary. And Jason Huff. Hi, Jason.
I know.
So we have you until 3 o'clock, and I think you said the presentation will be about 40 minutes.
Yeah, that's fair.
So in terms of the format for our meeting today, you'll have your presentation, and then afterwards, if there are members of the public who show up, we'll make sure to give them an opportunity for 2 minutes of public comment.
Okay.
And then after that, the commission asks clarifying questions about your proposal.
Okay.
And so they'll ask you questions about based upon their expertise or interest. And then after that, we have a period for deliberation, which is really their time to work. So they typically don't ask questions and don't necessarily want to interact unless something they need a point of clarification, or you hear something that you want to follow up with that seems incorrect or you need more information. And then we'll be taking an action today based upon the concept designs at this point.
Okay.
And that will be led by Benita. I think unless I've missed anything, we'll just go ahead and throw it to Ann. Are you kicking us off?
Yeah, I'm gonna kick us off.
Okay, great.
Good.
And Leo, you're running the presentation. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you everyone for the opportunity to present the Bitter Lake Reservoir Improvements Project Design Commission today. As I mentioned, I'm Andy Carter with Seattle Public Utilities. I'll be providing an introduction to the project. And then thank you. And then Lair Alderman with Consor and Aaron Luoma with HPV that will be providing the design context for the project, as well as conceptual design. And then Kevin Bergström with the Seattle Department of Parks and Recreation. He'll be discussing the coordination that we're having with the Parks project that will be coming up as well. And then Jason Huff with the Office of Arts and Culture. He'll be talking about the progress that we're making on the 1% for art part of the project. Next slide. So as you can see from our project site map, our project is located in North Seattle. We're in the Bitter Lake neighborhood. So the project site is bordered by North 143rd Street, and on the south, North 138th Street, and on the east and west by Linden Avenue North and Fremont Avenue North. And then the project location address is 14141 Linden Avenue North. So we've been coordinating with the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspection on the project. So we've completed a preliminary assessment report. We've also had our pre-submittal conference with them in late January. So our project number with them is 4462-22PA. We've also been coordinating with the Seattle Department of Transportation on the project for the required street improvements that will be required. We've met with them several times. Right now we're working on our conceptual design for the street improvements. So we'll be submitting those designs to them shortly. So we don't yet have a set number, but we'll be getting that soon. And then we do anticipate we'll need a SEPA checklist on this project. So we'll be kicking off the SEPA checklist as we move into the 60% design. Slide. So here, this is our vicinity map. You can see our project site. It's in green and has that blue dash border around it. So you can see we're pretty close to the north border of Seattle. We're also located just northeast of Bitter Lake and then northwest of Ingram High School. We're also in close vicinity to Greenwood Avenue North, Aurora Avenue North, and I-5. So our project vision is to maintain the water system storage requirements, to continue to meet water quality and water service regulations, and to create additional open space for the Bitter Lake community, working in coordination with the Seattle Parks and Recreation. So how we're going to achieve this vision is first we're going to construct a new reservoir that's the same size as our existing reservoir, which is 21 million gallons. Then we're also going to create our reservoir with a concrete cover and a mixing system. And then the design of this reservoir allows us to reduce the footprint on site, and also because of the type of reservoir we're designing, we can bring in the fence line, so it opens up additional open space at the site for the community. So we have several project goals. One of our goals is to keep the project affordable to ratepayers. There's several things that we're doing to optimize the cost on the project. One is that we're constructing a partially buried reservoir instead of a completely buried reservoir. We're also putting the reservoir on the site location that optimizes the amount of excavation that we have to do to keep costs down. This also took a close look and analysis of our reservoir, looking at the diameter and height and keeping the same volume. What is the best design we can have that'll reduce the construction cost for the reservoir. In addition, we're looking at with our grading plan to keep as much soil on site as we can, because when we have to export soil from the site, that really increases the cost of the project. So another goal is that we must meet the city's stormwater code and regulations. So the existing reservoir was constructed in the 1950s. And then in 2001, we installed a floating cover on the reservoir. So regulations and codes have changed since those times. So we have to make sure we meet all the updated codes and regulations. Another goal is to provide the needed security and safety at the site. So these are drinking water facilities, so we need to make sure that the drinking water is kept safe for the public use. And also our facilities are secure and that, we promote safety for the public on the site as well. So some of the things that we're doing to promote safety and security on the site is that we will have fencing around our facilities. There will be controlled access. We'll have security cameras and site lighting as well. Next slide. Another goal is community engagement. We want to engage the community throughout the project. So we've already started our stakeholder interviews, our initial ones, and they're helping us develop our public involvement plan as we move forward on the project. And we're also planning right now our first community outreach event, which will be like an open house style event. We're thinking of having at the community center there. Will likely happen in April. So equity is really important value for the city and for Seattle Public Utilities. So we're making sure that we incorporate equity into the project. So as we were going through our options analysis phase for this project, we did complete the department's equity toolkits. And in that, we learned what a diverse neighborhood we are working in. And some of the key elements that we feel that we can incorporate that feedback in is the open space and the art element as well. So another important goal is to maximize the development of this open space, working with our site constraints and working closely with the Seattle Department of Parks and Recreation. We want to make sure that when we're done with our project and they're coming in, there's not a lot of rework that they have to do. And a big part of this is a mass grading that will happen on the site. And then 1% for art is an element of this project. So we want to make sure that we incorporate the art in a way that's meaningful to both the community and the utility. And we also want to consider how the art works with the reservoir as well as the upcoming park project. Next slide. So next, Lael will talk about the project objectives.
Thank you, Andy.
Yep.
So there are 3 actionable specific targets that we have for the project, these objectives. And summarizing what Andy let us know here, constructing the new 21 million gallon seismically resilient drinking water storage reservoir. That's the primary objective, as well as coordinating the new reservoir construction with Seattle Park and Rec's need for additional open space at the site, and then finding a meaningful way to incorporate art into this project. Project scope and budget. So this is primarily a Seattle Public Utilities reservoir project. So again, the scope of the work here is the design, engineering, and then the follow-up construction of the 21 million gallon pre-stressed concrete reservoir, including things such as site vaults, piping, and then security improvements at the Bitter Lake Reservoir site. We just completed 30% design, so the budget is still in development for the reservoir project. And then similarly for Seattle Parks and Recreation, they will just start the conceptual designs for the park. They're lagging behind us just a little bit. Conceptual designs are set to begin this spring, and that will then lead into planning, design, and future development of that additional open space that's created by our reservoir improvement project. So the budget for that is still to be decided, as well as conceptual designs are realized and then preliminary and final designs are completed. I think it's important, we've already touched on it once or twice, but there are a few entities in here, and just kind of letting everybody have a clear picture of what those schedules look like. We did just wrap up preliminary designs for SPU's project, and with the intention of late March, early April, going into final designs. And that will take another 2 years to complete, looking at construction and in particular groundbreaking for the spring of 2026. And then project closeout would not be until the end of 2029. So Seattle Parks and Recs, they will be beginning their conceptual design as we are moving forward with our final designs. And so at the end of 2023 right now, tentatively, they are planned to be done with conceptual design. And then that allows them this period of a number of years to develop project funding, scoping, complete their designs, and then their installations would follow as closely as possible on the heels of the reservoir project being completed. I think it's also important to talk about the arts part of the project. Beginning next month, we'll be bringing the planning artist on board to the project. And that work would wrap up at the end of 2023. And then the public artist would join the team while we're completing 60, 90, and final designs. And then that allows several years for the fabrication and then installation of the artwork, which would likely be initiated at the completion of our reservoir construction and then incorporated into the park improvements. So to give a bit of context on where this site is located with regards to the rest of Seattle, as well as the makeup of the neighboring community, we asked Aaron to walk us through that.
Yep, so this is just a vicinity map, again, to orient you of where we're talking about in kind of the far northwest corner of Seattle, just below the city of Shoreline. And I know that the design team and Kevin, we've talked a lot about how while this project is in the city of Seattle, you know, the community is much broader than just Seattle because of its proximity to Shoreline. But people who do currently use and will use this open space in the future will likely come from Shoreline just as much as Seattle. Next. So this map identifies some of the key public open spaces or private open spaces. In our analysis, you know, one of the key significant features is the Bitter Lake Playfield and Community Center by Bitter Lake. But besides that, there's not a lot of public open spaces in close proximity. There's some existing park facilities, P-Patch, that Leo will go into later on site, but there's not a lot. There's mostly schools, a mix of public and private, some golf courses, and certainly some larger civic buildings and facilities, but they're quite a ways away in terms of walking or even a short drive. So next. In our analysis of the transportation systems, it's a really growing neighborhood, in particular with light rail coming to on the I-5 corridor and the two stations really kind of on the north and south ends of our project. And then there's quite a few roadway improvement projects that are happening on these east-west roads in anticipation of the demands and the need for multimodal circulation going east-west towards that light rail line. And then there is existing bus rapid ride on 99 as well. There's also connections to a cycle track and interurban bike lane along Linden to the east of our project that goes north-south. So we do have a lot of some existing infrastructure that's, I think, really benefiting the multimodal aspects of this project site, and then a lot coming down the pipeline as well. Next. This is just a brief snapshot of neighborhood projects in the vicinity. I think the big thing here to call attention to is that this is a changing neighborhood. There's been a lot of multifamily projects that have been built, even within the last couple of years, pretty close to this project site. So what once was dominated by, you know, car dealerships and kind of automotive oriented businesses along 99, there's more and more multifamily projects being developed and in the pipeline close by, really increasing the density of the overall Bitter Lake neighborhood. Next. So we took a look at some of the demographics of this neighborhood. I would say it seems fairly unique, at least with the data that we have, and walking about and observing the different types of cultures represented, the different type of eateries, even the food that I've noticed the community growing in the P-Patch, I think, is somewhat representative of the community as well. And notably here, there's 37% Black or African American, but notice how 27% speaks a different language. And based on our observations, we know that there's quite a bit of North African countries in this neighborhood. And so all of that data, the consulting firm for this project is taking into consideration in terms of translation of materials and understanding where those community hubs, those key stakeholders, as we really are still just beginning the outreach process. For housing and income, I think one of the big things that stood out to us is that 86% is renter occupied in this census tract. So that, I think, speaks a lot to the volatility perhaps of the community there, and the need for open space if they're in larger multi-use family sort of developments. And I think the opportunity this project presents to be able to provide that open space to such a diverse and large population. Next. As Andy mentioned, the site history, this is just a brief snapshot of this history. Of course, there's a lot longer history before this time, but really the origins of the reservoir began when the city annexed this portion of Seattle in the 50s and knew that water was needed to be provided for this growing suburb. And then in that aerial image shows the reservoir currently without the cover, essentially. And then, through the Homeland Security and concerns for just water quality in general, there was the covering that was added in 2002. Next. Hand it off to Lyle.
Thanks, Aaron. So this is just a schematic of that site that we just saw an aerial of. There's the reservoir with its floating cover centered in the site. And then you can see from the contours that maybe you couldn't really see that well from the photo is this reservoir is placed inside of an earthen dam. And so those are 3-to-1 slopes that come up from basically the roads around the property. And then SPU constructed a concrete lined basin inside of those dams. And so at the base of those hills, you'll see that black dashed line. That is security fencing right now, chain link fencing that is used to provide further security for the water beyond the floating cover. North of the reservoir is, in number 7, there is the community pea patch garden. And then as we go around to the east of the site, there is a playground and then a open public space. And on the east side of the project, there is existing SPU facilities. There's an operations storage yard. And then the smaller footprint there is a pump station that's supplied by that reservoir. In the southeast corner is an informal stormwater detention pond for surrounding areas. We should note that on the north, east, and south sides of this project are SDOT right-of-way, and we are coordinating with them on some street improvements, right-of-way improvements that they're looking for in the area. And then on the west side is a private drive, Fremont Avenue North, private maintained road, as well as single-family homes on that street. And here's an aerial image showing the site, looking at it from the northeast corner. In the foreground there is that public space for Parks and Rec. And then to the left or the east of the site along Linden Avenue, there's the medium-rise multifamily and elderly care facilities. And then north of the site, there is additional multifamily lower-rise apartments. Zoning and ownership. So this property is owned solely by Seattle Public Utility. There are a couple existing memorandums of agreement or MOAs, one with the Department of Neighborhoods for the community garden, and then another one with Seattle Park and Recs for those spaces on the north and northeast part of the site. Those will likely need to be redeveloped as part of this project. And then noting that the property is zoned completely for residential. The existing reservoir is an allowed non-conforming use. And in preliminary discussions with the Department of Construction Inspection, it appears that we'll be allowed to maintain the existing reservoir's classification for the land use review and approval. It's important to note some constraints and opportunities on these sites. We're going to talk about the physical constraints as well as some engineering considerations that need to be taken into account for the project. But this first slide here looks primarily at the physical constraints. Again, to the north in that blue coloring there are community spaces that are used by the neighboring public. On the east are existing SPU and city facilities. And then on the west, there is private facilities and a private street. We do have in orange we're showing there. Those are existing steep slopes, a critical area. And we'll be working with SDCI and looking for an exception to do development because part of this project is removing the steep slopes. And then we are again working with SDOT currently at 143rd north of the project. They're looking for limited half street improvements on the southern half of that street. Along Linden Avenue, we have an existing 5-foot wide sidewalk that they want to widen to 6 feet. and then some minor pedestrian access improvements on the south end of the site at North 138th Street. So engineering considerations for the project. What we've done here in red, we've highlighted the top of the reservoir. And that's roughly 525 feet by about 300 foot east-west there. And then in blue is the outline of the concept of where the new reservoir would go. And so there's quite a few things we're looking to do here with the reservoir location. As Andy noted, we're looking to minimize soil hauling quantities from this site, and in that way maximizing the amount of soil we keep on site. And a number of reasons, including cost savings, as well as we're looking for opportunities to reduce the overall construction window of this project for the neighborhood. And then we're looking for a location to put the new reservoir that takes advantage of the larger excavated area within the current reservoir basin. Additionally, there are some stormwater management challenges. SPU's geotechnical group has made the recommendation that we do not do shallow infiltration of stored stormwater on this site. We do have a layer of soil about 10 feet below our site that will not allow for further infiltration of water. And so we're concerned about subsurface flows from large volumes of water. We also do need to provide that site security that we're talking about for a finished drinking water facility, and then also maintain facilities access for proper maintenance. A little bit more on the engineering considerations. So we have done a fair amount of work to look for an optimized footprint of this tank, again, to allow, the smaller the footprint of this tank, the more additional space we have for the community as well. But also the sort of tried and true reservoir design right now for seismic stability is a circular pre-stressed concrete reservoir. And so this section through the site shows that. Another thing that we're trying to do here is maintain the floor elevation of this new reservoir that you see in blue with the existing floor elevation of the reservoir that's in place. And you'll see that in the red dashed line. In a nutshell, that's basically to maintain existing hydraulic conditions for the service area. You raise the reservoir and you change pressures within that service area. Also, you change the elevation of that floor. Either you're doing more excavation, and this is a 320-foot diameter tank. So every foot you go down, there's a significant amount of excavation. Or every foot you come up and you're putting crushed rock in, again, that's significant quantities that you're hauling into the site. So there are a number of opportunities that we've found with this project, and I think it's really nice to highlight some of the coordination we're able to do with other city departments. In particular, working with SDOT to have improvements to the project adjacent streets and to improve pedestrian access in and around the site. Working with Seattle Park and Recreation for the creation of the additional open space, as well as working with Arts to incorporate the 1% for Arts program into the project. It is also a great opportunity for community engagement, getting public input for the open space improvements, as well as what sort of art they might like to see at the site. And then doing some innovative stormwater management practices here at the site. So again, we can't do shallow infiltration, but the site is reasonable for deep infiltration. And that is going down 100, 120 feet below the subsurface and using an underground injection control well to place water in shallow or aquifers on the site. And Kevin, if you wouldn't mind talking about some of the opportunities and constraints for parks on this site before you begin conceptual designs.
Sure. Thanks, Lyle. Yeah, Seattle Parks, we're excited to be a part of this project, kind of continuation of our efforts dating back to the early 2000s when the park was first designed and also presented to the Design Commission. So what's unique about it and what more of the opportunities we're looking at is, of course, the additional open space based on the preferred reservoir configuration. So it will get approximately 6 acres. While that 6 acres is there, that's both around the north side and the south sides. And the north side is where the most opportunity is for more recreation. And then we'll see. We'll have to see as we go through public engagement how that shakes out, what the community is looking for. One thing that will be also an opportunity and perhaps a bit of a challenge is how to blend the existing park spaces into this new area, especially since it's anticipated it will be at an elevation at least 10 feet above the existing park space. The other thing that is important to Seattle Parks, as well as all city departments, is improving accessibility to the site and on the site. So we'll have to have designers that are experienced with that, which almost everyone is. The other thing is we'll have to think about how we balance what community desired park amenities may be on the new portion of the site, especially with the adjacent single family residential to the west. And then especially so that if it was, since it is raised up, if there was an activity that generated noise into the evening hours, that might be something either we'll have to reconsider or consider mitigation on how to lessen that noise. But overall, it's a great opportunity for Seattle Parks. And as Lael and Andy have mentioned, we're a little bit behind in the process here, but we're rapidly working to get a design team on board so they can generate conceptual and then perhaps schematic design, at least for rough grading, so that SPU and their project isn't moving, as one project manager has said, moving dirt twice. So I'll turn it back over to Lael.
Thanks, Kevin. So wanted to introduce you to some of the concepts that we're planning on moving forward with the project and use that as a means for getting the commission's input on things moving forward. We, as Kevin mentioned, this project did come in front of the commission back in 2003, 2004, and that was for the creation and development of the playground and the public space there on the north side, and then as well as in the southeast corner, there is a sitting wall there that divides the existing stormwater detention pond and the hillside that goes up to the reservoir. But there has been additional work done that SPU took on in 2017, 2018, and then later brought Consor on as a consultant for options analysis. And so this is a clip here of those 4 options, and I'll just briefly walk you through them so you can see what we've considered along the way. The first option was to just replace the existing floating cover. And then there was, and then move the fencing up closer to the top of the reservoir. That just had the disadvantage of not really being able to provide much additional open space for the public, as well as not really improving on a situation that SPU sees as a maintenance issue with that floating cover, as it only has a 20 to 25 year service life. Option 2 was looking at removing the floating cover, but keeping the same configuration for the reservoir and putting a low profile aluminum roof on the reservoir. That would be a very unique situation because they don't make very many or construct very many aluminum roofs of this size. There were concerns for the ongoing maintenance, and then there was a 50-year replacement cycle for that aluminum roof as well. Again, you're not opening up much of the site for public use. You still have the steep slopes that go all around the reservoir basin. Option 3 with the pre-stressed concrete reservoir, that provides you a lot of flexibility within when you decide how much material you're willing to haul off or keep on the site. You can adjust site grades accordingly because this reservoir can be fully exposed, partially buried, or totally buried. In our work so to date, that we find the best balance of soil is to leave it partially buried, and then that provides opportunities for lessening grades around the reservoir while opening up more additional space for public use. And then the final option was similar to what SPU does at a lot of its reservoirs, is fully bury the structure. At this site, that would have created a 50+ foot tall mound. It would have been it is a nice open area at the top, but we heard concerns from the public that live to the west of the project, as well as from law enforcement, that there's now this large area that they can't easily access. They have to get out of their cars to kind of walk up there and figure out what's going on. And so that didn't, right from the start, have much public support. So the preferred option is option 3, this circular reservoir, which you've seen a couple times pop up here, so it's probably not much of a surprise. But this type of reservoir does offer increased seismic resiliency compared to the other options that we presented. It does have a 100+ year service life. There is flexibility in how you grade the site with this option more than any of the others, because the ability to partially bury and not have to fully bury the structure. And then again, we can work with the site grading to minimize soil hauling as may be necessary. So again, just a rough schematic here of what that site plan looks like with the reservoir, not quite centered in the site there, but then seeing the additional open space created to the south and to the north. And then while maintaining pretty close to the existing access to the reservoir from the pump station parking lot. And yeah, so moving on to some visualizations that we've developed for that. This would be looking from the east with Linden Avenue in the foreground here, and then the existing SPU facilities a little behind that, and then the site here. And we just have the darker green just showing conceptually the flat space that we have that's to the north of the reservoir, and then some access areas for the maintenance road. The full removal of fencing around the site perimeter, but then bringing some back around the reservoir maintenance access road. Kind of doing a section view through the site so you can just get a feel of what those grades are. The roads around the reservoir are at about 480-foot elevation. And the existing, again, in the red dashed is the existing facility. It goes up to about 503 feet at the top of that earthen berm around the reservoir. We are looking to lower those grades a few feet and provide the open space north of the reservoir at about 499. And then right before that little rise that gets you up to 501, that would be where we'd put some security fencing and then leaving an exposed wall elevation for the reservoir of just over 20 feet. And just for sort of a sense of scale, I think that the section on the right does best with showing you that 8-foot tall fence and then the reservoir that extends up above that with the access road in between the two. Here's another visualization of the site. Again, this is more if you were standing on Linden Avenue, showing that the reservoir does blend in a little bit better with the site. Again, it is a large structure, approximately 320 foot outside diameter, but with the exposed walls of about 20 foot, and then more of the open space to be used with the existing SPU pump station in the foreground. Site circulation. So currently the existing reservoir is accessed from Linden Avenue via driveways in front of the Bitter Lake pump station. And we propose to maintain that existing access, provide a circular one-way path around the reservoir for facility maintenance. You can see a couple of gray bump outs, if you will, on that road, and that's for maintenance parking. And then the one on the east that's a little bit larger, we've sized that for a medium-sized crane so that maintenance crews can lower and raise equipment and materials off of the roof and into the reservoir as well. Access and security, there is that black dashed line that we're showing on the outside perimeter of the reservoir. We are planning to install that fencing as well as lighting around the reservoir. That security designs are part of our 60% design, and we're looking for public input on what they might want to see. In some projects, we've mounted lighting to the reservoir. Sometimes we do it to the interior side of the fence. The idea that whatever we do will not be upcast, broadcasting light upwards, but more down to the ground, so there's not a lot of light pollution for the local residences there. We will be installing security cameras so we can maintain an eye on the reservoir as well as around any vaults or critical infrastructure for water that we have there. And currently at this point, based on initial feedback that we have from SDCI, we will not be needing to provide additional parking at the property as well. As I noted, we will have fencing around the drinking water facility. And we're proposing to add some additional fencing around the existing operations storage yard as well as the pump station. SPU has a standard 8-foot tall metal decorative picket fence that has been installed at a number of facilities. We have a couple pictures here, as well as here for drinking water facilities that are incorporated into parks, just to give you an idea that this is something that has been done before, and the public seems to accept it, and it blends in nicely while providing security. Stormwater management, again, coming back to that, we do have our challenges. As I noted before, shallow infiltration is not available at the site. A little wrinkle with the deep infiltration that I spoke about with the underground injection control is that the water needs to be near drinking water quality before you put it down into the aquifer. I'll note that rainfall that hits the top of the reservoir and then as well as around the access road around the reservoir, that is only requiring detention and does not require treatment, just because of the nature of the reservoir roof, as well as for those access roads because they have such few vehicle trips that will be on them. So we're showing right now the conceptual footprint of this pond at 95,000 gallons, which addresses the 25 and 50-year storm event. And then that would be fed down into the underground injection control well. An additional challenge we have with stormwater management is that the local downstream system is at or near capacity. And so we're looking under our options here, we're looking for as much on-site management of those flows as we can. And currently our preliminary designs for the UIC well do take into account all of the design storm for the 50-year event. And then we would have to use some downstream capacity that's available to us for any events over that.
So I'll just briefly touch on the landscape plan. And this is, just to orient you, this is for the SPU project because Parks is catching up schedule-wise. So the goal here really is to provide the best canvas possible for Parks and their team to come later with the design. And that is essentially temporary seeding, preserving all the trees as possible, removing that fencing and shrinking that quite a bit. So we give that just open area, that blank canvas to work in. But if you go to the next slide, we recognize and don't want to be designing in silos. We want this to be a collaboration. It has been a collaboration so far. And working with Kevin and talking to him about just preliminary ideas and understanding what are these kind of touch points that we know of, at least now, of what we want to accomplish. And I think the first one is just simply understanding what is the available space that's truly going to be public and versus what does need to be secured from a water quality standpoint. And then certainly fine-tuning the schedules both through design and then into construction. So as Lyle mentioned, that ideally when Parks or when the SPU project is done, Parks begins their construction right on the heels of it so that there's no lag time in between. Working together on community engagement, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for that, depending on just the sequence of schedules, making it really clear which project is which, but understanding from a community perspective, they'll just see this as one project, and being aware of that when we develop our communication tools and materials. And then grading, I think, is probably the biggest one in our foresight now is, as has been mentioned, how can we avoid moving soil twice? What can we do while all this heavy machinery and equipment is on site, excavating, demolishing the existing reservoir, building the new one? How can we basically do a lot of that grading now so that the Parks Department can come in and really build what they want to build without having to move things around and have, again, a lot of machinery and trucks and hauling and noise around. So those are just some of those points that we have discussed. And I think as we get into it, there'll be more and more as we begin to understand what the vision for the park space really will be.
Thanks. Just to give an idea here of what this tank will look like in the real world. So right here I have a couple construction photos. This is a cast in place concrete reservoir. What we have is a concrete slab, and then we'll be constructing wall panels. There's about 40 wall panels that will be needed to construct this reservoir. Each wall panel for the forming, the pouring of the concrete, and the setting of the concrete is a 2-week process. So we'll be looking at about 80 weeks in just doing the walls of this reservoir. And then picture to the right there shows sort of the inner workings of the wall with the rebar and some seismic cabling that ties the wall to the reservoir floor. And then this is a similar project. This is a 6 million gallon reservoir that Consort completed a couple of years ago in a residential neighborhood. It's fully exposed concrete roof, and then for a similar scale, this is a 15-foot exposed wall on the reservoir, then with a 15-foot wide paved access road around the tank as well. So this incorporating sustainability into this project, primarily again for SPU, it's about ensuring the long-term safe drinking water at this facility. So this pre-stressed concrete reservoir, as I noted before, has a 100+ year service life, has a proven seismic resiliency in events up and down the West Coast, and particularly outside of the Los Angeles area. And they're also being constructed around the globe in high earthquake prone areas. We're looking to minimize soil hauling efforts and maximize soil reusage on site that will help reduce fuel consumption, as well as wear and tear and heavy traffic on all of the surrounding roads and disturbances to the neighborhood. Reduction of the urban heat island effect with this additional open space. There are opportunities for planting more trees, for reducing the footprint of this existing structure, and then increasing the city's electric vehicle charging infrastructure with the installation of 2 charging stations as part of this project. Community engagement, we've touched on that a bit. I just wanted to give everybody here the background and kind of what we're doing and then moving forward on that. We'll continue to actively engage the Bitter Lake neighborhood as well as the urban village throughout designs and project constructions. For a bit of background, prior to initiating the preliminary designs, SPU analyzed the project using their racial equity toolbox. And this included stakeholder analysis, development of an inclusive engagement plan. All of that is to figure out who do we talk to in this area and what are their concerns, and allow us to think ahead, how are we prepared to address these concerns through the project designs and staging of construction and things of that matter. I think an important finding from this work that SPU did is through their racial social equity index, this area of the city is found to have the highest level of disadvantage and priority. So we need to be actively engaging the community throughout this process. So we have already brought on to our consultant team a dedicated member for public outreach, as well as working integrally with SPU's communication groups as part of preliminary designs. So I think it's important to know from the stakeholder interviews we've completed the concerns that the public has out here. There appears to be in and around the site a fair amount of illicit activities occurring. And there are concerns that with removal of the existing site perimeter fence, that it may lead to an increase of these activities. So no surprise then, the desired improvements, the one that keeps floating to the top is safety. Folks are looking for adequate lighting, cameras, and not creating isolated or hidden areas with the development of this project. Folks do want to maintain that community garden if possible, but they do understand that there's heavy construction that's happening and full use of that property may be required, but they would hope that following this project, there would be an improved community garden available. Accessibility improvements, again, if we're dealing with grades out there at the site, making sure that the site is available to everyone. And then there are folks have described wanting to have some exercise spaces here. Again, we have a lot of dense multifamily housing there, not a lot of opportunity for exercise areas. So things like basketball courts were brought up quite frequently. So to date, what have we done? We've conducted, we identified as part of the stakeholder plan 8 primary and secondary stakeholders. We were able to conduct on-site interviews with 6 of the 8. The other two we are still actively trying to engage, but they've just not been available with matching schedules. The third, kind of the tertiary stakeholders and the community at large out there, we have offered up a community website survey, and that's been taken advantage of by a few dozen people in the community. SPU has established a project information website and provided a link there as well. And we're finalizing the draft of a public involvement plan. And so coming up here as we initiate 60% designs, we do have right now tentatively scheduled for the last week of April, our first drop-in open house in the neighborhood for the Bitter Lake Community Center. And then we'll be having a workshop with the design group in March as to what sort of materials we need to present, looking at the demographic makeup of the neighborhood and what sort of, do we need to have interpreters there? What sort of language, practices do we need to have set up so everybody gets a full understanding of what this project really is? And then at the 90% initiation and as well as the final design, we will have another community open houses at this time, as well as for folks who can't make it in person, we'll be having a web-based open house. And then we'll be doing project website updates as big things come along for the project, being milestones, as well as when we're kicking off construction and then keeping people informed of what the upcoming activities are. And then Jason, thanks for sticking around this whole time. If you wouldn't mind walking folks through what the public art part of this project is right now.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lyle. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. Just apologies in advance. I have electrical contractors in my house. Here's why it's dark here. Hopefully there won't be any shouting or pulling me away, but I'll try to get this quickly. Thank you all. It's a pleasure for us to be here to present our plan for public art for this project. We will be using a combination of both Seattle Public Utilities and Department of Parks and Recreation 1% for art funds to fund this project. And I think probably addressing a lot of the concerns that the Design Commission has had in the past regarding early engagement of art or artists into a project. And this is something that we've been working on in our office in sort of ways in which where there are projects that are steeped in community. And so we're sort of running a beta test. So this is probably the first one where we're kind of really fully launching our plan, which is to use a planning artist model for these projects, because getting a commissioned artist on this project right now wouldn't really do any good because it's very early and still a lot going on with design. And so the idea of having a planning artist is to come in and do early engagement with the community. What we're trying to get away from, as part of our equity plans and our goals, is to get away from the top-down approach of developing public art projects. Like, we know what's best for you, so we're going to do this. More of this is just taking the time to go into a community, build trust, have multiple regular engagement opportunities for folks, whether it's events, whether it's just activities, just walks, just different ways to engage with people, try to gather input. And so the goal of this planning artist will be to engage with community over the next several months. And so you can see this image here. So we have done two projects where we have used this approach and tested it out. This was the first one we did in the Central Area Water Main project with SPU, with Melvin Freeman, who was the artist. But prior to Melvin being commissioned for this, Arts commissioned a group of artists who, again, went out and talked and worked with communities to get information, sort of like, what kind of art are you looking for? Do you want temporary engagements? Do you want a permanent project? What type of project should it be? Where should it go? And so we were able to get that information, and that helped build that scope of work for what we did. And so the community wanted a permanent artwork. They wanted something that really chronicled the history of the people in the Central District. And so Melvin created artwork. You can't see it here, but the letters that are there spell out Central Area. And within those letters, if you haven't seen it, are images, photographs that people in the community submitted to Melvin to use in this artwork. So it's sort of not necessarily for all of our projects that are moving forward, but those, again, that are really steeped in communities, such as this one here at Bitter Lake. We really want to make that investment to make sure that people's voices are heard and that they are influencing or partnering with the city to develop art in their neighborhood. And so we have a budget of up to $56,000. It depends on what the artist is going to plan on doing over the next several months. So they're going to start from April and they'll run at least until October, when all of the design process is happening between SPU and parks. And then at that point, they will help, again, work with the community to select a commissioned artist for this project. And so, yeah, we're hoping to have the artists will then jump on the project in about a year from now. Next slide, please. And just so, again, so this person is going to kind of wear many hats on this over the next several months of working directly with community and then also working directly with the design team. And so, this person is going to do a lot of code switching so that they can really kind of maybe help explain like more of the complex areas about what SPU is doing and kind of making it digestible for folks who can really understand what's happening and how, this is going to impact their community and what they can do to influence that. Also, with parks. And so with all of the design team members from both organizations, plus with the outreach folks that SPU and parks will be hiring, will all kind of work together, again, to just gather information, get in that community, build trust, and have them be a part of this team to have this artwork that will be a part of their community and will be part of them. So here you can sort of see like what their scope of work will be for the next 6 months. And yeah, I think we're on track. We're hoping to have the artist on board by the time we have the April open house to at least get it started there. But from then on, they're going to be out there with regular meetings and activities and events with the community.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. All right, and that wraps up our formal presentation. So available now to any questions the commission may have. Thank you.
Anita, I don't think we have anybody online that's not a member of the public, but so I just asked if there is a member of the public that is interested in making up to 2 minutes of public comment, if you could raise your hand. I think it's everyone from either commission or department, so.
Only
obviously
attendee is Bill Wells.
Is Bill Wells part of?
Yeah, he's with SPU.
Okay.
Obviously there's no one here with us today, so, we can go ahead and check back later. Do you want to start in the room with questions and then go online and then deliberation online and back here?
Sure.
Alphabetical order. I learned my alphabet today. Hey, Amalia. It took a while this morning for me to do that.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. I have kind of a number of wide-ranging questions, so I'll just kind of shoot. But would you flip back to page 31 in your show? If we have the same. Yeah, so here it looks like there's about a 2 foot, if I'm reading this right, it looks like there's about a 2 foot grade change between your proposed park grade and the finished grade at the reservoir. But then if you flip to the next slide, it looks like that's a very small person or a very large slope. And I'm just curious which one you thought was.
Fair enough. No, it is the 2 foot rise. So that would make this about a 6 inch tall person. Yes, we'll get that fixed up. Yeah.
And then is the side of the reservoir, is that proportional to the size of the person, or is that also maybe?
That would be more proportional to the person. So yeah, roughly 5 times taller than the person, 4 to 5 times taller than the person.
Okay. One of the things I noticed is just and then I think, yeah, your next visualization actually kind of showed it. I guess we're on progression here. So I was curious, has the team cut any, say, site sections between the proposed tank location and some of the existing structures? I'd be curious to know more about how it fits within the neighborhood context. Is that something you've looked at, or?
Yeah, that's where this comes from. We've done that in the north to south as well as the east to west. again, all the streets are at about 480 around there, and then the houses or the multi-use on the east side of the site, the top of those are about equal to the top of what this reservoir will be, maybe a story or two above. And then the houses to the north, you know, kind of maybe looking somewhere at the middle of the tank, and then the private residencies to the west would be below the tank.
I see. And are there important, I appreciated your analysis at the beginning, are there important kind of view corridors or other considerations such as that matter to the neighborhood or that you're planning around? I was curious about how you selected specifically the location that you selected on the site.
Sure. Just where it sits. So again, wanting to take advantage of, and let me see if I can get back to this. Wanting to take advantage of that existing footprint of the reservoir. This section right here allows us to keep as much dedicated open space at one part of the project. We do need to have that large stormwater pond, so we kind of wanted to keep that cordoned off to one part of the project. And then again, to the north, leaving as much available open space as possible. And so we did want to go in and use as much of the available floor space in the existing basin. Again, looking to reduce excavation quantities, as well as knowing that we have a good subsurface for this tank foundation at that location as well.
Sure. Earlier you had mentioned part of the project, if I heard you correctly, was removing steep slopes.
Yeah.
Could you say more about where that is? When I look at your kind of final grading site plans, it looks like some of those reservoir slopes are still there.
Sure. So anywhere in this orange here is designated as an environmentally critical area for the steep slopes. And basically it's the nature of the construction that was for that in the late 50s when they built this earthen dam. That was my understanding that was before this designation existed for there. And so it just, those slopes fell under that designation as they came around. And so the idea is that as part of our construction is we're going to be taking these steep slopes, flattening them out, pushing them into this reservoir footprint where available. Currently, you know, it may be a matter of contour spacing, but we are reducing those slopes right now. Again, we're going to go to a maximum 3-to-1 around the reservoir site over in these areas. And then we will have to still have some amount of slope to get down to the roadway area.
I see. So in later slides, like say slide 37 or 36, those are showing existing grades, not the proposed grades.
There is a little bit of overlap of existing and proposed, but I think you're looking at these where there's a little bit of steepness, and then we still do have 3-to-1 slopes here that get you down to grade, to existing grade. And again, that's just a function of us trying to keep as much soil on site as possible. If we hauled everything on site, our full excavation quantities now are approximately 55,000 cubic yards.
Right.
And you know, thinking about that, you can get 8 to 10 cubic yards in the back of a dump truck. That's a lot of hauling that we're trying to save from the site as much as anything, but recognizing that we still are keeping some grades at the site.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think the grading plan shown is really, it's very conceptual and early because we know that we want Parks' input on that. And so that whatever design they come up with, there'll likely be some areas that will be 3-to-1 or that steep, but we also know we want to improve the access overall. So it's just a matter of moving and massaging that land.
Got it. And did you, I might have missed it at the beginning, did you talk about where the grades that we're seeing, obviously they're constructed, but are they constructed from grades that were on site, or is this soil and other materials that we hauled here? Like what's the original condition of the topography?
The existing dam is built from materials excavated out of that location and then used to build the hillside. So it's all native materials to the site.
I see.
It's a glacial till type material.
Got it. Okay. It sounded like you're including populations, the kind of folks who live around there. Was it your intention to really include them more in the design process with the actual parks design, or how are you engaging the community, I guess?
Yeah, so in one of the later slides here, just talking about the stakeholder plan that we developed and then reaching out to certain individuals in the community. So we reached out as primary stakeholders to the community center coordinator, to the community garden coordinator, to a couple residents along that private drive, to the homeless authority for King County in the area, because especially during the COVID time, there was encampments that were at that site. And then also speaking to SPU crew leaders who worked at the site, incorporating their feedback, what they've been seeing at the site, who they see has been using the site, and what sort of improvements they would like to see out there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just so I'm clear, STCI is not going to give you any exemption or acknowledgement that the steep slopes were like not natural.
So we're working through that right now. That would be part of a building permit pre-application conference, and they've asked us to wait till 60% designs are further along. So right now
But the onus is on the design team to do that, not an acknowledgement from STCI.
that is our understanding so far.
Got it. You mentioned at the beginning around, I think it was in the community slide, you said something specifically about how this interacted with the adjacent single family residential. You put the SFR. Could you expand on why you called out that particular land use as opposed to any of the other land uses you highlighted on the land use map?
Sure. It's funny. You work on these presentations and then you're sitting here and that caught my eye as well. So it's the residential areas just around.
Okay.
Because again, most everything is residential, whether it's mixed use residential or.
But you're not giving more, my question is, you're not giving more attention to the side that might be against single family as opposed to any other land use?
No, and so much as they have been the most vocal about the safety concerns, as well as there's a large chain link fence that separates those properties. And they've been very vocal about wanting to keep that. And there's been some drainage issues that they would like to see if we could get resolved with the street improvements. But no, in particular, no special attention has been provided to them.
That's a nice segue to my next question, which is, could you clarify where you're anticipating or where you have been directed that you need to do frontage improvements?
Yeah. So right here along 143rd, along the property bounds, if you will, there, it's an existing concrete panel street because it's a bus route.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been told that we need to expand. It's an informal street side parking. So we need to formalize that and pave that with concrete paneling, establish or reestablish the curb line, provide a landscape area, provide a sidewalk area, and then provide a pedestrian buffer zone along that area. SDOT is taking the conceptual designs that we just provided, and they will walk that project corridor and tell us in particular which concrete panels need to be replaced. They're not asking for a wholesale replacement. And then along Linden Avenue, we have a 5-foot wide sidewalk, and they want in most areas to increase that to a 6-foot wide sidewalk. So they're going to allow us, at least initially, they've said that we could go and keep that existing sidewalk and just add on 12 inches. And then right here on 138th, you can see that there is a cul-de-sac that stops right here, and then there's a road that just sort of peters out right here. Oh, I guess you can't see the cursor, but it peters out in between the big bidirectional arrow. We need to provide some pedestrian access right there, as well as they've asked for a little bit of circulation through the south side of the site as well.
So you don't have to do full frontage improvements on the south side?
Correct. And that's because there's quite a number of significant and large trees there. And then this is one of those areas that their front yards kind of now creep into right away. And they just thought that it was best for the community in that area to kind of preserve it feels nice and woody back there, so.
And then the west side you mentioned is the residential, so effectively private property goes up to that west side for
Correct.
the most part.
Mhm.
Okay, so like they have to maintain their own private
Yes.
property. Okay, two more quick questions.
Yeah.
I think you said this, but so the reservoir is going to have the same like you mentioned in a 100-year life cycle.
Yes.
So is that the same capacity that the current reservoir is now, or you're planning for like the materials are 100-year lifespan, and you anticipate that this is going to have a capacity for the next 100 years as well?
So we are matching the existing storage volume. So the existing storage volume is up to 21 million gallons, and that's what we're providing with the new structure. There is and Andy, maybe you want to speak to this about the additional capacity in the reservoir. There is sufficient capacity to meet the current and future demands for the reservoir. Typically, planning goes out 40+ years and not to the 100-year mark. But we aren't seeing any time in that planning horizon that the demand would be over that for what we have stored in the facility.
You know, a big part of this reservoir, its size and volume needed is an emergency.
Okay.
So if there's like a big earthquake and things go down, we're able to take this water that mainly comes from the toll and, you know, pump it to the south side or pump it to different areas. So a lot of it is emergency storage.
And then last question, you mentioned like some of the concerns about the activity, like this is a really long construction timeline by the time, like we're talking like 5 to 6 years, and you're asking the community engaged now, you know, whether it's parks or is there opportunity for, as part of the engagement, to like allow for work parties or have people to help like start to take ownership and engage through that and like start to find out how they're going to best use it? Or have you thought about ways to, I mean, when you go there now, it's like fenced off and it's overgrown and like there's a lot of stuff happening. And I just was wondering if that's a way to like, you know, show attention to this site so that it's drawing positive, and the neighborhood see it now as an asset, right? Or more parts of it as an asset than the others. I just was wondering if that had been discussed or there was any funds for that. And I mean that a little bit differently. Like I understand this, the artist component, that's also a great piece, but I just was wondering, just a pure maintenance activity.
Yeah, there hasn't been any discussion on that yet, but as we coordinate with parks, you know, it's something that, you know, we could discuss.
I'm going to ask a very similar question, but kind of from a different angle. Jason, you mentioned the planning artist being embedded in the community, so voices are heard, also engaging in a lot of interactions with SPU and parks potentially. And did you also mention design team, or did you?
They're gonna work with the design team too, to weave in.
Okay.
Yeah.
You may have said it and I just didn't hear it. And so what do you all imagine the dedicated outreach team member of your team and the planning artist, do you imagine the relationship between those entities, persons?
Yeah, we will be having some kind of coordination between them as we move into this. And once we get the planning artist on board and we finish our public involvement plan, we'll have a better idea how that element will kind of work together.
So it almost sounds like they're coming on board almost simultaneously. If there's a planning artist in a month or so, and you're just starting with your dedicated team member?
Yeah, they've been on board. We're just wrapping up our public involvement plan. And that's part of that. We're kind of moving into when our 60% design, that's when we'll have our open house.
Oh, so your public involvement plan is finishing?
Yeah, our initial, yes.
Okay. So if people's voices are heard, I guess I'm thinking about timing. So say well, do I have a question?
Okay.
I do have another question. So are most of the concern, is most of what you heard from the community at this point about safety and security? That's the primary kind of.
That is definitely the one item that keeps floating to the top, but also, as I pulled it up here, exercise spaces and accessibility. But yes, safety is a concern at the site.
And do you have demographic information on all of that outreach that's happened and that is winding down?
As to who we've spoken to and who in the neighborhood has completed public surveys and such?
Yeah.
We do. I don't have that on hand right now, but I can get that for you. Yes.
And will all that information be available to arts?
Yes.
And the planning artist?
I think it's important to note too that Annie and I are on that selection committee for the planning artist as well. And so, and we both take it seriously, incorporating that in the project. So I'm really interested to see how that all plays out. But yes, we'll be taking the information as we're wrapping up all those things. It's excited to hear Jason say that we'll be able to have them on board in time to bring them to the first public open house. And we'll make sure that they're getting everything they need to be successful for this project.
That sounds great. That sounds great. I'm on the selection panel too. So.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great.
That may have been it. Oh, I know. Is there others, you mentioned this fair amount of security now. Do you anticipate more different security, as this space is completed over time?
I mean, I guess, plan for, we'll have fencing and there'll be like card readers to get in there. And then we'll have, cameras around the reservoir, but our security folks, we can actually look at what it pulls up, right? And you can block certain angles. So depending on privacy and different things, we can do that. And there's specific lighting for the cameras as well. And we're still figuring out with security, what areas will light up as the reservoir, because, we don't want to create a lot of light pollution, but a lot of it is kind of secure. So we know what's going on. If someone's trying to breach the fence or whatever, we can see that through our security cameras and stuff.
And I think for the parks perspective, and Kevin could speak to this too, but it will be a challenge because if you've been out there and if you even envision lowering the grades, it's still pretty high. And so the sight lines into the site, those view corridors, however we grade this, where planting goes, where lighting goes, if there's lighting, and as Kevin and their team will kind of evaluate what can be the natural, what can be the more hardened security features that parks may need to incorporate is something that they'll have to look into more. Andy spoke to just the SPU security side of things, but I think how the project as a whole addresses the community's concerns is something that Kevin will have to continue to evaluate.
And so that's part of the discussion of security and safety as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Thank you,
Wait,
Aaron.
I was gonna say, we're going a little long on questions, so we want to make sure everybody.
I'm done.
Okay, yeah. I was. Sorry.
Erica.
Okay. So I do have a few questions. One might be the obvious, but is the option for fully covered completely off the table at this point when you move into the next phase of public outreach?
Yes.
Okay. Number two. In the image of an existing similar structure, it was very sparse throughout, outside of the reservoir. Is there regulations about how much landscaping or vegetation you can have within proximity? Or would it be possible that vegetation would sort of help to conceal some of what I'm worried would be kind of like a prison-like structure?
Yeah, there are some limitations as far as like the closeness to our fence line. I have to talk to our security. That probably depends if there's trees, how high they get, how tall the branches are, because we want people to climb a tree and get over the fence, right?
Right.
There's also our underground utilities. We have large pipelines that come to the reservoir, so typically they have to be within 5 feet of that, so the roots don't get down to the pipelines. But those are kind of the biggest restrictions that we have.
Okay. And then my third question was regarding a lot of our questions about grading and sort of the earth movement on site, and thinking about this as a large art potential. Is earth moving and earth art an option for this site? Because it is such a large development. I'm just thinking there's a huge potential to not just flatten the site and then have a flat site to work with, but really create something quite unique in this space.
I'd say yes, there'd be an opportunity for that. As part of bringing the planning artists is so they can look at different elements of our project and how they can incorporate those, working with the public and working with the design team as well. So yeah, something like that could be pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then I know, I guess, question about Linden. Obviously that street has changed drastically. I know there's been a very long interest in that being more of a pedestrian and sort of comfortable focused street as opposed to 99, which is like the main corridor. Do you guys know if there's additional traffic calming or sort of work that's going to be done along Linden that would help slow traffic? Because right now you can still really shoot down that area. I'm just wondering if there's more of a neighborhood scope of adaptation to make this site work best.
I don't know. Either of you know what the plans are for that. SDOT didn't mention anything to us on that. I don't know what their plans are further for the neighborhood, but something we could look into, and talking with the community, if that's a concern of theirs.
Great. That's my only questions.
All right.
So one of my questions in just thinking through some of the grading that's being discussed and that will be continued by parks, are there territorial views from any of the graded areas surrounding the reservoir?
Like from our graded areas?
Yeah, views to beyond from up near the reservoir.
I don't know.
I mean, the scale, even to be able to have access up there and beyond the fence, the scale is immense. And so when you're that high up to the existing grade, you can see, I mean, there's quite a few conifer trees to the north, west, and south because of that single family sort of residential area that still prevails. But, you know, you can see up and down Linden pretty good. The multifamily housing to the east, you can't really see towards 99. But at least within that kind of large block, you do have a pretty expansive view. One, because there's no trees at all, it's just all grass. So that height you can really do see from the top down quite a bit.
And then my next question is there a timeline for grading feedback from the parks and the design team for SPU?
As far as I would say, like when we're gonna, you know, move into our 60% design, but like in our 90% design is kind of when we kind of gotta get that rough grading really locked in.
Yeah, and that would begin tentatively the start of next year, 2024. We definitely want to know if there was going to be large scale earthwork improvements, things like that, that parks wanted to incorporate in their improvements.
Okay, and this is a question for parks. What is the timeline for? I recall the timeline for getting the planning artist. What was the timeline for getting the design team engaged?
Thank you for the question. We're working on it right now to get a RFP out. So it would probably be April at the earliest before we get a design team on board. And then at that time, kind of part of the scope of work, we'll get it more defined on how the public engagement between Parks Project, arts efforts, and also SPU efforts. So we're kind of at least more coordinated on that, so we can readily identify recreation needs or desires in the neighborhood.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all of my questions.
All right, I just have a couple and then we can go to Jill and Matt. So I wanted to, and I realize that there aren't dedicated construction dollars yet, or you're determining that budget, but the way, Aaron, you were talking about it, you were scoping what SPU would be obligated to build, right? We're gonna do this mass grading and we're gonna put down seed and obviously the work associated with building the large reservoir. But in reality, would those construction dollars come together and then this gets built as, you know, one project essentially, or is that, seems like there could be like efficiencies and benefits from design integration and whatnot, if at least the target is to bring those together at some point.
I mean, ideally that would be, you know, the projects come together, but in the past, just with the differences when the designs are going, like say like the Maple Leaf Reservoir and other examples, you know, there it was similar to kind of what we're trying to do here, where they, you know, built the reservoir and then the parks project came afterwards and did the park work. And we also need to make sure we keep the dollars separated. So as far as, you know, because our project for the reservoir comes from ratepayer funds, so we can't be using the water ratepayer funds for park activities.
And there is a time sensitivity with that floating cover that's out there right now, is very close to reaching the end of its service life.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Sorry, what was my other question? Well, really, it was related to timeline as well. But essentially, they end up being sequential projects, even though you're going to try and coordinate design so that you're setting up for SPR well.
Yeah. Yeah. We could be just like the general earthwork contractor and the landscape contractor comes afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. And then I guess I'm curious, since this is a cast in place concrete structure, is there a architect or designer involved in, you know, finishes, I don't know, forming, like ways you can treat this as it's a massive piece of architecture, right? How can this be elevated as a structure that's going to be really prominent?
And that's something that's, we have our planning artists on board. We could have them, we're talking about, looking at the elements. That's something that they could look into. It's one thing we did talk about in the past. There's a way to, put art into the wall of the reservoir. But another thing we have to think about, how visible is that art going to be when you have, a fence around that, right? So something that, hopefully we'll get input from the planning artists and see if something like that would be feasible.
But right now it's there's an engineer designing it and specifying it,
Yeah.
elevating it.
And there's only so much we can do, I assume, with the reservoir wall. There might be some things you can do with it, but it's.
Yeah, typically it's a shotcrete coated concrete structure that, the most we've seen folks do is paint the outside of that structure to blend in with the neighboring community so it's not gray. Some people think the gray blends in nice with our skies around here as well. So we've seen a little bit of both happen.
I'm gonna hand it off to let's see, Jill.
Okay, thanks. So when I look at a map, I see that there's a fairly good sized shag housing, senior housing on one side. Have you looked at them in your outreach, or do you in your age demographics? Have you looked at any of that?
Yeah, we reached out to them as one of our secondary stakeholders, and they responded that they only wanted to take the online survey, and that was for the property manager. And then there has been efforts to try to get them involved in taking the online survey as well. Okay. I can't really speak to how many of those individuals have taken up the opportunity to do that survey, though.
Okay, but you are trying to collect some age data as you look at your demographics?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, knowing that that is a prominent facility that's right adjacent to our project. Yes.
It's pretty good size.
Yeah.
And typically, maybe we're not past COVID enough, but typically those can be good places for holding meetings and other things too. Can you go to page 23? I know that's the page Adam had you at earlier. I had a little bit of a breakdown when I looked at this. A little like, oh my God.
Okay.
I couldn't understand at first the stormwater management. I was like, it's a reservoir. Why are you managing stormwater? And then I got it that you're managing the construction of the site and the built-in. Okay. But then I said, okay, well, where's the water coming from then? That's going in the tank. Because we talked about managing the water outside. And I think I heard you say it's coming from the toll, that you're piping all this in and this is just a storage. Right?
Yeah, it comes from the toll watershed, and that goes down to our Lake Forest Park, and then it comes from there into the Bitter Lake Reservoir.
So nothing about the reservoir itself relates to the local hydrology with Howell Lake, Bitter Lake, Thornton Creek, any of that, right? It's not. You're actually not part of that hydrology story.
No, what I was speaking about here is the water distribution system hydraulics. So elevations of this reservoir dictate water surface pressures for the customers.
Right. So then my question was, I was trying to kind of assemble what were the pushes and pulls that got you to the sweet spot of the grade you're proposing. Because I think we had a lot of questions about grade, and it's great that you're lowering as much as it is, and it'd be great if you could go lower, but you have reasons why you can't. But I think that there's a lot of reasons, right? Like the water pressure, like the stormwater infiltration. Did I also hear you say that the amount of soil to haul off site would be prohibitive?
Not prohibitive, but it gets very expensive, yes. Yeah. And so really, again, the floor of this reservoir is one of the things that really can't be adjusted, because that is helping to establish the service pressures for the area.
Right. And that's why I think this map is one of the better things that sort of says, here's the sweet spot.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to make sure I understood that properly. Okay. Yep. Matt, you want to ask?
Just a couple questions. Are there any shadow studies of this, or I can get to the comments of that, but if you haven't done shadow studies, I think we might want to do that. particularly in order to help with the design of the open space that's going to be created? And then, so I guess the answer is no on shadow
No,
studies.
we have not done shadow studies yet.
And then at the north area, north of the site on 143rd, is that, I see that's a park area. That's not part of this project, or would that be part of this project? Looks like there's a pea patch and a small play field.
Yeah, that's not, we're hoping with this project that we don't have to, I guess, demolish that area to use it for staging, but that will be as Parks is developing their larger project, they may redevelop that area. They're still kind of determining what they're going to do and how they would incorporate that into the larger park, or if they, demo that and just rebuild that kind of stuff. But
Okay, so
when
Parks
Kevin's
is,
still on, he can talk.
that's a helpful clarification for me. So Parks is going to be designing the public open space on the site that as well, potentially, as the park, right? That's not part of what you're presenting.
Correct. We're like, kind of what Aaron said before, we're kind of leaving an open slate of the open space and then, coordinate with parks, and they'll be developing their park project to design what that park will look like.
Okay, I'm good. We can move on to comments if that's what we're ready for then.
You have not done your threshold determination yet for SEPA?
Right.
No.
You haven't prepared a SEPA checklist?
No, we're starting that soon.
Matt, that might be where that study falls. Who's lead agency? You guys, or is it shared with parks?
It's SPU, because since they're separate projects, they would be doing their own SEPA as well.
So are you doing the SEPA determination for parks? Or will your SEPA determination cover scope of work for parks? Or does parks have to come in and do a separate SEPA determination?
Parks would be doing a separate SEPA determination.
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Okay, we're gonna move on to deliberation, and we have about a half hour, so I guess try and keep your comments to a couple minutes each, but it should be all right. Just based on the conversation, I think it would be good to comment on the engagement process to date and any thoughts on that, the planning for art, the approach, basically the overall approach to this concept, siting, form, topography, form, architecture, materials, etc. Right of way also being a part of this. Any thoughts on that? And then, the collaboration with SPR that is upcoming, I think that would be a good thing for us to also weigh in on. We could just go in the same order. I didn't mention sustainability. I don't know that we really talked about that a lot, though stormwater came up, but if
do you want to start?
It's one of our bigger topics that we look at, so.
Do you want to start?
Why don't we start backwards? Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Matt, we're going to go backwards.
Okay, fine. A few comments, I guess. Our experience, and my personal experience, when we're dealing with a site that has steep slopes that were the result of legal grading activities, then there's a clear pathway to avoid environmentally, to not have it classified as an ECA. You just have to prove that. So I think you're going to have flexibility on grading because of that, because it was illegal grading activities. But I think somebody mentioned, I think that thinking more about the topography that's created, the resulting topography, I think needs more thought. It seems like, we're going to have this high spot that's kind of flat and then it's steep. And I don't know, it seems like maybe there's an opportunity to do some landforming as a way of mitigating this giant object that we have to put here. I'm concerned about trying to dress it up with art because I don't think you can. I mean, let's be honest, it looks like a missile silo. It looks like a nuclear missile silo, and I don't like it. I just think it's an engineered driven solution, which it has to be, but I think it's really uncivic. The only thing civic about it is that we need water. But other than that, it looks like a military facility. And I think that's problematic. So maybe you just have to, if there isn't any creative thinking to move, to do something about that, then maybe you have to accept it and, you know, not try and put lipstick on it. But maybe there's something else that can come of it from working with the resulting land, that would be compelling. I think it's problematic that it's right in the middle of the site but I understand it's there because you're taking advantage of the excavated area that already has, you know, dense, subgrade. So that makes sense. It would be preferable if explorations could be done about where else on this big rectangular site, this giant, you know, silo could go. And also its size. I mean, could it be less diameter but taller? And how would that benefit the open space? I mean, I think it's just, it's so massive in terms of both its diameter in particular. And that's kind of why I was asking for shadow studies. I think it would be ideal if explorations could be made of the massing of this thing as well as the resulting work on the land. I do think that the risk here is that we're creating something that acts like a military facility in its aesthetic, and I don't really have a clear fix for that, but I think that's what it needs to be considered further. I'll stop there.
Jill?
Okay, yeah, I'll go next. First off, I have to tell you, this is just fantastic, the gain in open space. So I'm going to back off a little bit from the nuclear to, it's just fantastic to get this acreage. And I can't think of a part of the city that needs it more. Every time I'm over there, I'm just in shock of the more and more apartments that are getting built there. So that's great. That said, the next time we see this, the aesthetics do matter and have to be part of, I think, what we look at, and can't just wait for parks and art. So you've heard some interesting ideas about where, you know, regardless of what your procurement method is, an architect on your team could potentially show you some interesting opportunities that could be done with that concrete rather than just painting it. It could be formed in a different way. It could have texture. It could have a texture that creates interesting shadows. I think we've got to get the aesthetic considerations in. I also think the land forming idea is kind of fantastic. You know, I think one design adage is if you can't hide it, feature it. So you're going to have a really weird grade and you got this big thing. So play with it, have fun with it. But please, the next time we see this, we need to see some of these aesthetic concerns. They can't just be passed off to the next project to do. I also think, and again, I don't want to just push this off to art, but this is a neighborhood without much identity. You know, we've been working on the light rail station, and there was talk about Thornton Creek being the identity. It's really Haller Lake, Bitter Lake, Thornton Creek, all these separate little water things that are all interesting, but don't really connect. And you've got these two lakes that are mostly private property and closed off, so they don't have a civic expression. So as fantastic as it is that you're bringing the open space, what comes with that, I think, is the obligation to think about how you can help with the identity and a focal point for this whole very, very Spartan kind of area. And then the only last thing I want to say is, you said you hoped the pea patch could come back. You guys, the pea patch has to come back. So I'm hoping that you can bake that into your program right now and make that guarantee. That's it for me. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jill. I'll just get myself, since I'll summarize it, what was backwards order, Molly.
Okay. So one, regarding engagement to date, so I really appreciate the use of the racial equity toolkit for community engagement and for the planning artists. Involvement, I would say continuation of using the racial equity toolkit. One piece, let's just make sure that we're not focusing on the single family residential more than the multifamily. I know you thought about that as well, so I think I'm preaching to the choir. And I would also say it'll be nice to continue to be updated about the successes and challenges. And this is a little bit more toward Jason of the planning artist approach and the community engagement, as well as the engagement between the planning artist and the design team moving forward. So we'll be interested to hear about interagency collaborations in that regard, as well as design team engagements. I will say, so based on the timeline, it sounds like landscape and planning artists will need to move quickly in order to make some of these big decisions that we've discussed. So things like earthwork, earthwork's relationship to art, community and vision spaces, whether those are up high, down low, how they engage with the neighborhood, those sound like they're going to have to happen really quickly in order to keep up with SPU's timeline for grading purposes. So I would just encourage that continued speedy collaboration between parks and SPU to make sure that as much of that work as can benefit the grading for the parks continues to move down the line. So just staying in close coordination with the artists' engagement as well as the design team as they come on board. And then just making sure with some of those visualizations that the human scale component, particularly when things are going out to the community, just making sure that those are matching. So when we're looking at sections, just making sure that we're really clear about what our scale is compared to this structure. I think it's just going to be very important to the community, and knowing that, and then, I think that's good for me. I'll pass it off.
I want to really second a lot of what has already been said. I think this neighborhood has gotten its unfair share of investment for a long time. It's at the extent of the city, and that therefore, generally speaking, means that it hasn't gotten its fair share. And so I will again reiterate how important it is that this is becoming a public space that this community doesn't have, and really keeping the mindset that this is a new public space versus this is a utility, and therefore treating it respectfully as so, as Matt said, really thinking about this as a civic structure, and a huge, huge civic structure that's going to be placed within the confines of a neighborhood that's serving a really underserved body of people who critically needs this open space. And I think a really great option for outreach is Ingram High School. I've done considerable work with the students there, and they are wonderful, they're creative, they've wanted open space and safer places together for a very long time, and this would create that for them. And so really thinking about how you might have a focused youth outreach and engagement structure as part of your artistic process and as part of your public outreach, I think would really benefit the site, especially if you are able to move forward with earthwork as part of that. Just utilizing those young and excited minds to think about that just has so much opportunity in this space. And then also thinking about how existing infrastructure in the area feeds into this site. There's just going to be more and more people who live immediately adjacent to this space, and making sure they can safely access it. And it's not sort of an isolated bubble, because that's, as Jill said, kind of what's happened in this area. We just have these super isolated little speckled amenities. And so thinking about how this site could better integrate into its surrounding facilities with STOP moving up forward, I think would also be a good conversation. Great.
Oh, am I?
No.
I think it's Elizabeth, me, yeah.
We're trying to work backwards. on
Okay,
that.
We're challenged, yeah. It's good for our brains, yeah.
I heard you saying, obviously, those of you who are in front of us right now are a little bit ahead of some others who are working on this project. But I also heard Erica brought up landforms. I was also thinking about that. And you didn't say no. So I think that's not the only time you didn't say no at the point you're at. So I guess, I have this vision of, you all being here, parks kind of coming up here, and then this might happen. And if you can possibly stay in touch, be in touch now, be in communication as it goes forward, and try and keep that open-handed, open-minded approach. I think that'll really benefit this project. One of the things I find most compelling right now in my own mind is what feels safe. Because you already have a whole bunch of input based on what's already happened. So what goes forward? Stop thinking about fences and cameras for a little while, and you brought it up just a little while ago. What happens within the landscape? How do we design this space so it is safe? And I also suggest that there may be a community conversation around that. And when I was teaching, I happened to kind of provoke a conversation among 15 students, art students of very diverse backgrounds, and what makes you feel safe? There was not one identical response. And it was a really interesting conversation because, male, female. So, it's a heavy conversation in a way, but in another way, I think that conversation needs to be had for this particular space with its history, with its present, with its future.
Well,
Amalia. So I think I'm also in the camp where I have an affinity for infrastructure as an element. So I think there is some beauty in the simplicity of a concrete structure that's holding water and keeping us safe. And however we can share that. I do appreciate the comments about military, but I think we could find a halfway point. I know there's sensitivities of like, well, what is this structure? And like, hey, this is drinking water. You probably don't want to write that on the foundation of the building. But I think just thinking about a way to celebrate this as infrastructure, and this is a true civic space that it's having all of these elements on it, and it's really multifunctional, which is really efficient, right? And so any way that can be conveyed. However, please don't let the funding sources be the barrier for future collaboration, particularly when it comes to the community. It is unfair that because part of this is being paid by ratepayers, that there would be an undue burden to engage this community more than it would be if this could be of one funding source and the park was actually part of the project. So please be mindful of over this 5 to 6 years, 5 to 7 years, the ask you're doing of this community and being really thoughtful then about what they are getting in return. I think I would ask, I'm not going to be on the commission anymore, but I would ask the commission to be mindful of that, because what I think could risk happening here is two processes, right? And then they're not going to connect. And the ratepayers are going to check their box, the ratepayer funding, and then Parks is going to check their box. And I don't mean that to be flippant, but I think that's a reality. And I think we also, as the commission, have to start having conversations with SDCI about some nuanced things like this that make this a challenge. Like, there are some unreasonable things I will not go into for the purposes of time, but I think we all know what they are around this. And I just want to say thank you for being proactive and having a good understanding of the site and what your requirements are around the stormwater and SDOT at this point in the process, because as you know, that factors into this cost. So I think all of those pieces are, and I'm really excited to see the art. I think whether that takes a landform or other opportunities, but I do hope that there are some immediate steps to show the community that this site is going to move forward, and that is a way to engage them and give back to them what you're asking them to do for you. And I think we need to be more thoughtful about that in the city when we're asking for all this input for these really long-term projects, that particularly if this is a rental, a higher rental market, like some of these people may not be able to realize 6 to 7 years pay down, because who knows where they're going or what they're doing. They may or may not. And so I think, how can they benefit from being part of that process now? And they'll probably be more engaged if they could see, oh, wait, I could use this pea patch, or I could use this corner, or I can feel safe walking my dog along this part of the block. So
yeah, thanks, Moana. I just wanted to say thanks again. I think you guys have a lot of balancing that you're doing, obviously, your kind of needs for critical infrastructure into your ratepayers, as well as all these other things that we're asking you to do. So I think you're in a really tough position. And I wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think, you know, the coordination with SDOT and ARTS and SPR is awesome. And we love to see that on a timeline and that you're all working together. Matt and Jill said it a number of times, but it does, the visual prominence of this is gigantic, right? It's a huge thing, and it's going to be even more prominent in the future. And so really thinking about, I think you were saying, Amalia, not just as a functional piece of infrastructure, really, but as civic infrastructure that has a 100-year design life and really enhances the quality of the neighborhood and really celebrates who SPU is, seems really important. And if that means bringing on an architect to help think through those details that don't add, you know, a ton of costs, whatever it needs to be, but really thinking of it as civic architecture and civic infrastructure rather than just functional infrastructure, I think is important. Benita was kind of hitting on it, or no, it was actually Jill, sorry. But it does seem a little bit strange that this is, you know, all the water's coming from one place, and then you're building a new detention pond, and it looked like there was sort of a wetland on the site. So I do wonder if there's, and it sounds like you explored some infiltration ideas, but I do wonder if there's more work that could be done about restoring site hydrology, or at least making that story clear to the users of the site so that it's either reducing the number of kind of ponds around, or even, you know, I don't know, I'm not gonna, this is probably a kind of a flyer, but like, could the water, you know, go into the tank instead of into a storage pond, et cetera. So just ways to think about how this could, I think, enhance and connect hydrology on its site, since it is essentially a project about water. And just started talking about the roof. You have a huge roof. It's a gigantic roof. I wonder if there's an opportunity to collect, you know, energy or water or something else there. You know, I don't know. It sounds like you're trying to keep people off there, but trying to think about the roof as an opportunity, maybe an area to explore. I think, Elizabeth, you were mentioning this, but the safety was one. I totally hear the neighbors, and I feel the same way, and I hear what you're saying, but I think there's a lot more to safety than kind of who you keep out, and, you know, cameras do very little for safety, is the honest truth. And so I think one challenge to you as the team is like how do you bring people in? How do you bring more people into the site? And so I think part of that, Amalia, you were starting to mention, but thinking about rather than it's fenced off and we're going to do design and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Maybe there's a series of kind of early wins that the neighborhood could have, whether it's, you know, the pea patch or crosswalks or sidewalks or native plantings on the site. I don't know what they are, but maybe there's a way to think about it as more kind of a series of wins that the neighborhood could slowly be kind of brought into the site as areas, you know, become available. I kind of mentioned the safety thing, but then you know, just past the architecture itself, just thinking of all the elements, I think is civic is another important point. You know, you showed the fence and maybe that is the right fence, but there are only a couple of elements here. We talked a lot about the grade, but really thinking of this as a civic 100-year project. And I guess my last point is, you mentioned that kind of 25 to 50-year hydrological event that you're designing towards. And I think this is just a kind of a push generally at SPU is just to think big picture. You know, I don't know how often this 25 or 50-year events are happening, but I bet 2 of them happened last year. So I don't know. But really thinking about this, not just what the codes are, but how we can demonstrate our values in our infrastructure. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. So I will summarize. I heard a lot of recommendations, but not a condition. So first up, I want to start by thanking the team online and the team here in the room. We really appreciate you coming forward and sharing this project with us. It's really a great opportunity, and, you know, we're really excited to see it moving forward. Especially appreciated the opportunity to expand open space and public park space for this neighborhood. We appreciate the engagement process to date and look forward to it continuing. And the identification of the, you know, bringing in arts and starting to bringing in SPR soon to take advantage of those opportunities. Seattle Design Commission approves the concept design for Bear Lake Reservoir with the following recommendations. We would like you to really think strongly about topography. We know part of the issue is because your partner designers are not engaged or been hired yet. But that timeline, bringing that timeline forward is really critical, because it would be a real missed opportunity if the two teams don't work together to really think about this, both from the broader aesthetic and the experiential point of view, but also efficiencies of earthwork, right? Think about the reservoir structure as a great piece of infrastructure, a great piece of engineering, but what else are the opportunities there? We'd like to see some study of the massing, are there other options in the massing of it? Are there options in how it's treated, finished, whether that's coming in from the arts side, or if there's, I think there is a role for an architect on this team, and that you should strongly consider that. But also working with arts to see where are the art opportunities. But it is a very big facade, so I don't know if the art budget could really make it something else. I think in general, we appreciated the location and the reasons for it and maximizing open space. So well done there. Though there was, as Matt noted, potential. Are there other proportions that might even make that open space better or have other results? The neighborhood. We appreciate the engagement done to date. We know that there's going to be that continuing engagement processes started by other agencies, and that this is a long timeline. So really think about what are the near-term wins. How do we make sure that we're not tiring the neighbors, but also like working together with your engagement processes? So how does this team loop back in with the arts team and SPR to make sure that just is a good integrated process? Thinking about youth, we didn't hear the demographic numbers. We know you have the data, but have you really reached out to all the different representatives within the community? Potentially think to Ingram High School or other ways of reaching specifically the youth group. Safety, think broadly about safety. It might not just be cameras and light. And I think the suggestion to pull that back into the engagement process and really ask people specifically what does make you feel safe or what would make you feel safe. And then we had some, if I would summarize some of Adam's comments, some broader questions that get into sustainability. How can this project tell a story of hydrology on this site, but also maybe, and I know there's reasons you've gone after the detention pond, but are there opportunities from a water point of view to do more water quality? It sounded like it wasn't required. Could you still do it? Is there a benefit to that if you did do it? Could that roof provide some other sustainability benefit? It's an interesting idea if it could collect energy. I don't know, maybe. It would be great to explore that, and just think about setting a high bar, not just checking the boxes of code requirements. There was a little bit of talk about the right of way. I think we appreciate what's being done, but thinking about Linden and that as a corridor that could possibly use some traffic calming. Is there an opportunity in your process as you engage with SDOT more? I think I got it.
I have two things that I think.
Oh, okay.
I just want to make sure we're put in there. I think this idea about like a shadow study of the structure on the site and how that relates, and then expanding those cross sections. So like, what is the height of the buildings that just got built? What is the height?
Yeah.
And like, there's some pretty established trees as mentioned, and so understanding the scale of the surroundings, like who is experiencing this from up above and who's experiencing this down below, just as a specific, like, for the next round, some thought about being able to present that to us in a better way. And I think that idea of like the street level experience versus as you move on that.
What can you see?
You can't be up, it's.
Yeah. What equipment you see if you get up high.
Yeah, I think you described the relationships, but it'd be great to see that. And
Well, I think too, to the point, I think you're asking for it because its role in informing decision-making in terms of great visuals, all of it. But it's not just an exercise in itself. It should be used to inform and support your decisions about key parts of your program. And
yeah, what was I supposed to say? Oh, we didn't do the vote.
You decided.
You've been doing this.
Yeah.
Do we start in the room or go?
Yeah, let's start in the room. Everyone.
Adam Amron, approve.
Amalia, approve.
Elizabeth Connor, approve.
Erica Bush, approve. Molly Spitalnik, approve.
Benita, City approved.
Jill.
Approve.
Approve, Matt.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate all the feedback.
Yeah.
It would be great. We're taking this forward to 60% design.
Typically what we do next is, and Wendy had to drop off a few minutes ago, a draft set of minutes will be provided that memorializes this and the action specifically, and then we'll reach out to kind of talk about next steps, and I think maybe a better understanding of how the two bodies of work are understanding the budgetary challenges, your plan, and maybe talking more about how they start to align.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yep, thank you all.
Thank you.
And commissioners, I think I'm gonna stop the recording.
Right on time, look at us. Back together.
Look at
Thanks, Jason.
Everybody else that I can see. It just keeps going all night.
The recording is going just because I think Juliet started it, so.
Oh.
She dropped off. Anyway, congratulations, Anita. Congratulations.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. Say it's like, congratulations.
What?
Did you get like a certificate?